And it's so weird for a company like Netflix, which routinely will end a show like Teenage Bounty Hunters, which was screaming for a second season. So I really, really enjoyed part 1 of Lupin. I thought when it came out, it was one of the best shows I had seen that Netflix had created, and it did really well in their top 10, and I think it set some records as far as being a foreign show and how well it did with American audiences. Also, I mean, I mentioned this in my review of part 1, watch the show in French and read the subtitles, please. Omar Sy, you need to, just watch it in French, it's much better. And I hesitate to ever bring any sort of criticism towards a show that I really liked, but I'm a little divided on season 2, part 2 of Lupin. So we'll start with the good. Omar Sy is phenomenal. One of the best actors currently in the world. I mean, he mostly does French films and TV shows, but he's incredibly talented. I'm glad more people are getting to see his work with a show like Lupin. He carries the show. Now, he carried a lot of season 1. It feels like they're leaning on him a little bit more, but he is so charismatic that he is more than capable of carrying the entire show just by himself. So Omar Sy is phenomenal. We already know that. The actor who plays his son is great. The best friend he has is also really, really well cast, and Hassan and his best friend have a great dynamic. Get to see them interact a lot more in this second season, which is also great. This is a very relationship-based season 2 of the show, which sometimes it works and sometimes it gets a little bit lost, but we're trying to stay positive. I think one of the best aspects of this season is that it continues the show's ability to always keep you guessing. You think you know where it's going, you think you have all the information, and you just never do. The show's writing always does a great job of making you think you know exactly what's going on, only to reveal that they have just showed you a tiny bit of what's actually happening, what the real plans are, and what's going on behind the scenes. And that is great. Season 2 is also sort of a mixed bag. I think one of the, problems, because it's like, this is still a phenomenal show. So this isn't even like, none of this is really bad. It's more just stuff that I didn't agree with. And I think the main thing was, this felt like it should have just been a 10-episode first season, because the latter half of this felt a little thin. It felt, especially in a couple episodes, for example, the first 2.5 episodes, so the first half of season 2, really, it felt like they were kind of stretching how much material they had, and that's a little bit evident by the first 2 episodes being shorter and the last 3 being longer. The decisions they make during this season just don't make a lot of sense, and I think for a show that had such tight writing in the first season, there are some weird loopholes and just inconsistencies with the story, and some character motivations that just disappear and then come back and then disappear again. And, I think one of the big things with a show like this, it's at its core is a cat and mouse game. And it, to an extent, it's a heist show. And the issue with stuff like that, I think as I was watching the show, it kind of made me think about the YouTuber Mr. Beast. And I've seen some interviews with him, and he mentions that, like, as popular as his videos are, the problem is that people expect them to get more and more crazy. He finds himself having to one-up his videos, and they get more and more expensive to make, and they take longer and all that. I think that's sort of what happens to a show like Lupin, which I think is why they tried to ground some of it in character relationships, but there is a real feeling that in season 2, they are trying to one-up a lot of the heist-style plot lines in the first season. And there's a real go big. They're going big with a lot of this stuff. When the show was at its best, it was when Hassan was crafting some sort of heist scenario, and there are plenty of situations in season 2 where you're like, how's he gonna get out of this? And I like those. I love all of those moments where Hassan really seems like he's backed into a corner. I think there's just more instances in season 2 where there's a lot of convenient things that keep the story going, which is, look, writing television is really hard. So I understand writers just being like, hey, what if this just happened in this moment? And that's how he gets out of it. But that happens a lot in this season. And I think I'm, only honing in on it because the first season was so tightly written. But it does happen a lot in season 2. And it's to the point that it's hard to ignore. And it's not a bad thing. I think it's more just like it's a crutch, a little bit of a crutch. I think the other thing is I found myself wondering if we needed a season 2 at all. I thought that season 1, had it not ended on such a cliffhanger, the story was kind of over. Like, if it had ended, it would have been fine. And I think the end of season 2, it really feels over. Even the characters literally saying it's over, it's finished. And then them bringing it back for a third season, part 3. And maybe this is a little bit of PTSD here, but I'm getting kind of a Sabrina Chilling Adventures. Like, Lupin is a much better show, okay? And it's, very smartly written, has all the right people in charge. But similar to Sabrina, phenomenal casting of the main character, and all the actors are really talented. But the longer the story went, the more you start to felt like, did we need this? Or could this have ended? And it's so weird for a company like Netflix, which routinely will end a show, like Teenage Bounty Hunters, which was screaming for a second season, but then will beat these other shows into the ground because of their popularity until you don't like the show anymore, or until the show itself is garbage. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen with Lupin, because it's really good, and it's still really good. Season 2, in my opinion, is not as good as season 1. A lot of that came down to the writing and some of the decisions they make about where they want to take the story, which to me felt a little dragged out. But I think going into a third season of the show, I don't see where the story goes from here. And I think you could continue it from the same main villain that they've had for 2 seasons now, but part of me doesn't really want to see that anymore. I think Hassan is such an interesting character that it would make more sense to put him into new scenarios. The person that came to my mind was like Indiana Jones, Nathan Drake, Lara Croft, right? Because at a certain point, this becomes just like, it's in his blood. Like he has to, he loves doing all this high octane, adrenaline pumping stuff that he does, all these situations he gets into. And those stories from those video games, go figure, always put the characters in new environments. And that's where they were able to shine, because the characters themselves were the most interesting part of the story. And I think with Lupin, Hassan, and who he is as a person and what he's capable of is the most interesting part of the show. And I think that would shine if you put him into a different scenario. And I think the other aspect is, like, it feels like the main villain here is the top of the food chain. So unless you want to sort of introduce, there's actually a bigger, more evil guy, which again would sort of feel a little bit lazy, it might just be better to fast forward, maybe a time skip for a third season. I don't know. I don't want to get into like too many season 3 predictions. Maybe that's just gonna be a separate video. Anyway, season 2 is good. Is it as good as season 1? I don't think so. Is it bad? It's not bad. There are just some decisions that I'm not quite sure I agree with.